May 9th, 1942. The world has never before seen a battle between aircraft carriers. This week, it does. This week comes the first major naval battle fought without the main bodies of the opposing forces having visual contact. The Battle of the Coral Sea. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, Burma fell to the Japanese, but the Allies sent naval forces towards Madagascar and New Guinea to try and prevent yet more territory from being added to Japan's new and massive empire. And the Allies have been reading more and more of the Japanese radio traffic, and they crack more and more of their naval operations code. So they know the details of Admiral Shigeyoshi Inoue's Port Moresby operation, codenamed MO, which is to happen this week. Unknown to the Japanese, their whole plan was laid bare during the first 3 days of May. A map of the Coral Sea had been laid out on the makeshift operational plot at SINCPAC headquarters in Pearl Harbor, overlaid with tracing paper and pinned to a sheet of plywood resting on two sawhorses. The staff marked in orange pencil lines the progress of the enemy naval forces. Heading south from Truk were the twin orange lines of Admiral Takagi's two carriers and Admiral Goto's heavy cruiser squadron. The predicted course of the Port Moresby invasion force wound out from Rabaul through the Louisiade Passage to the tip of Papua. Blue pencil indicated the converging American units. Heading west from Hawaii, but still 2,500 miles away, was Admiral Halsey's two-carrier task force. Some 250 miles west of the New Hebrides was the track plotted for Admiral Fitch's Lexington to join up with the Yorktown under Admiral Fletcher to become Combined Task Force 17. Steaming up from the east were the two cruisers of Admiral Crace's force, to be reinforced by the heavy cruisers Chicago and Perkins, dispatched from Hawaii. Admiral Inoue had no advance warning as Operation MO began that it had attracted such a great concentration of Allied firepower, now bearing down on the Coral Sea in an all-out bid to block Japan's southward advance. On the 3rd, the Japanese land at Tulagi and Florida Island, but their precise timetable is already showing strange. Takagi's carrier force is supposed to give air cover to the invasion force, but bad weather means they're 800 kilometers to the north. Fletcher gets word of the landings, so by the next morning, he's brought Yorktown like 150 kilometers south of Guadalcanal, and its planes attack the Japanese forces off Tulagi. They sink a few ships, though they're not really that effective. Yorktown then heads away south. Takagi gets word of all of this and heads to the area, but finds no enemy. On the morning of the 5th, the three Allied task forces meet up. On the 6th, they merge into Task Force 17. Intelligence says the Port Moresby invasion force, with the two fleet carriers, will head through the Louisiades the 7th, so Fletcher refuels them and plans an ambush. At 10 a.m. on the 6th, however, Task Force 17 is spotted by a Japanese recon plane, though the Allies are unaware of this. Inoue is shocked to learn that there is not one, but two enemy carriers planning to intercept his invasion fleet. But Takagi, who's refueling like 600 kilometers north of Fletcher, is not in a position to engage them with an airstrike, being at maximum range and with overcast weather that would make spotting the enemy difficult. So he sends the carriers with two destroyers south under Chuichihara so they can attack at first light the 7th. But Fletcher sends the oiler Neosho south with the destroyer Sims to wait in the rear, and then he heads northwest towards the Louisiades to block the Jomard Channel. Neither side realizes that at around 8 p.m., their carrier forces are only like 130 kilometers from each other. The morning of the 7th, Hara's scout planes are searching for the enemy in the south and report a carrier and a cruiser at 7:30 a.m. He orders a full airstrike from Shokaku and Zuikaku. Thing is, when they arrive, they find out what is reported as a carrier is the oiler Neosho, and the cruiser is the destroyer Sims. So they fly away to search for the real targets, but finding none, return and sink Sims and set Neosho on fire. She will be sunk, scuttled, in a few days' time. The Japanese lose 6 planes on this goose chase, though, but The same thing happens to Fletcher. A patrol from Lexington reports sighting 2 carriers and 4 heavy cruisers. So he orders a full airstrike, which heads off. But when the recon pilot arrives home, it turns out it's just 2 light cruisers and 2 gunboats, and a coding error had turned it into a megaforce. During that time, Japanese spotters have actually picked up the task force. Admiral Goto is with the transport convoy to the north, where land-based planes from Rabaul can protect them. But Shoho is ordered to immediately send an airstrike. Shoho is only 150 kilometers or so away from Fletcher's ships, but weather and just plain old luck save Fletcher from getting caught by Shoho's planes while most of his own are away. At 11 a.m., though, Lexington's air group spots Shoho through a break in the clouds and makes a run for her. Torpedo bombers fail to score any hits, but Shoho then turns into the wind to try to launch some fighters for defense. This makes her an easy target for the arriving dive bombers from Lexington and torpedo bombers from Yorktown. 93 planes in total attack Shoho, and the outcome is absolutely never in doubt. On fire, with no pumps and no power, Shoho sinks. Japan has lost its first major warship of the war, along with some 700 of the crew of 900. At 11:36, Yorktown receives the message from Lieutenant Commander Robert Dixon, who commands a dive bomber squadron from Lexington. Scratch 1 flat top. Dixon to carrier. Scratch 1 flat top. Crace's task force is meanwhile under attack by land-based Japanese bombers off Du Bois Island, but only takes superficial damage. They are super surprised, however, when after fighting off the Japanese, they are then attacked by 3 American B-26 bombers. Though American command will deny that such an error could be made, but they take no damage from them either. The Japanese transports have turned back to Rabaul to await the outcome of everything. And the confused and confusing actions of this day, the 7th, show both sides committing a bunch of errors, but the Japanese paying more for them. The day even ends with one. Japanese planes that fly close enough to Task Force 17 to be within radar distance are engaged by Wildcat fighters, and some of them try to land on Yorktown thinking it's one of their own carriers. They are quickly shown their error. Neither side attacks at night, and both expect a decisive clash between carriers. The 8th will decide the battle. Man, imagine being on one of those ships on either side that night. This impending first clash between 2 opposing naval air groups would be an almost equal contest. The advantage would go to the airstrike that managed to take its opponent by surprise. Now, for the first time, instead of guns, aircraft were the means of delivering missiles. And although the range between the opposing fleets was measured in hundreds rather than tens of miles, the outcome would be decided on the same fundamental principle. In the morning, both sides send scouting planes off at dawn. And as fate would have it, both sides sight their targets at about the same time, just after 8:15. And both sides launch full airstrikes. Just before 11:15, American planes reach Shokaku and Zuikaku some 13 kilometers apart, screened by heavy cruisers and destroyers. The Yorktown Air Group forms up its attack. Shokaku launches fighters, and Zuikaku makes for the cover of a squall of rain. Unlike the attack on Shoho, the Americans do not have the same weight of numbers here against Shokaku, nor do they have practice coordinating a dive bomb and torpedo bomb assault against an active and well-defended enemy carrier. But who does? Their attack costs them 43 planes, like a third of the total force. But they've started a fire on Shokaku's deck, so she can't use it for 90 minutes or so until it's put out. She is not hit below the waterline and heads away to the northwest. Thing is, the Japanese have been pretty darn effective themselves at pretty much exactly the same time. Lexington is hit by torpedoes both port and starboard, with dive bombers to follow. Yorktown takes a 600-pound bomb through the flight deck. The whole Japanese operation takes 15 minutes or so, but they depart reporting that they have avenged Shoho, sinking one large and one medium carrier. See, the Japanese think that they sank Lexington already back in February, so they think the ships here are Saratoga and either Enterprise or Yorktown, but they do believe they sunk both of them, which they have not. Yet. The attack forces reached their own carriers between 12:50 and 2:30 p.m. The returning Americans report damaging one carrier, but the other one got away unharmed. Howard tells Takagi he has only 36 operational planes left, and some of his destroyers are at 20% fuel. He says he can no longer provide air cover for the invasion, so Inoue recalls the invasion convoy to Rabaul along with Zuikaku and its escorts, postpones the operation until July 3rd, and sends Shokaku to Japan. Fletcher wants to get the hell out of Dodge because both of his carriers are hurt. So that's it. No. Aboard Lexington at 12:47, an explosion starts a fire. 2 further explosions send it out of control, and the crew begins abandoning ship around 5 p.m. Destroyer Phelps sinks carrier Lexington with torpedoes at 9:15, then rejoins the task force, which is withdrawing to the southwest. That night, Combined Fleet Commander Isoroku Yamamoto tells Inoue to turn around and damn well destroy the rest of the Allied force. But after spending most of the night refueling, Takagi's ships no longer have anything to find and destroy. The Allied task force has left the building. But even as that is happening, the green light and the preparations for the next Japanese masterstroke are in progress. Now on the 5th, Japanese Imperial Headquarters issues Navy Order Number 18, which directs Yamamoto to occupy Midway Island and some of the Aleutian Islands together with the Imperial Japanese Army. I've talked about this plan before. The current Japanese naval superiority over the U.S. in the Pacific is pretty heavy. Even after the loss of Shoho and the damage to Shokaku, they still have the carrier advantage 9-3 and the operational battleship advantage 11-0. So the Japanese intend to create an Eastern shield, while it seems to be a fairly effortless thing to do. They also know that the U.S. passed the 2-Ocean Navy Bill back in December and has 15 battleships and 11 carriers currently under construction. So the day is inevitably approaching when the Americans can launch overwhelming operations in the Western Pacific. The general plan at the moment is an attack towards the Aleutian Islands, followed by an assault on Midway. When the U.S. Pacific Fleet responds to that assault, another Japanese force, a hidden one commanded directly by Yamamoto, will attack and destroy the Americans, eliminating the U.S. Pacific Fleet for at least a year and giving the Japanese a base that is a direct threat to Hawaii, and that together with Wake and Marcus Islands can give plenty of warning of any future incoming threat. The Japanese have been running a 4-day series of war games to test the battle plans and extensive communications exercises. The war games come to an end now on the 5th, and then the Navy order is issued. The operation itself, I'll talk more about next week. 2 more naval operations of note happen this week. On the 9th, USS Wasp and HMS Eagle bring Spitfires to Malta. Now, more on that next week as well. This is part of Operation Bowery. 61 Spitfires arrive on Malta. Operation Ironclad is the Allied invasion of Madagascar to prevent the Vichy French from letting the Japanese use it. British forces, supported by a battleship and 2 carriers, land near Diego Suarez, the most important port. On the 7th, the Vichy surrendered Diego Suarez to Admiral Siffret and General Sturgis. It's not the only surrender this week, though. See, just before midnight the 5th, the Japanese land on Corregidor, the last major Allied holdout in the struggle for the Philippines. On the 6th, American General Jonathan Wainwright surrenders Corregidor and some 11,000 men to Masaharu Homma. On the 7th, Wainwright broadcasts the surrender of Corregidor from Luzon and suggests all other U.S. forces on the Philippines do the same. This campaign has been a real problem for the Japanese. General Homma was given 50 days to take the Philippines, and it's been 5 months. One real sticking point for the Japanese is the loyalty of the Filipino troops to the U.S. They did not expect that. Tomorrow on the 10th, General William Sharp, who commands the remaining American forces there, will give the order to surrender. And in Burma, they might not be surrenders, but two remarkable retreats are in progress. On the 5th, after traveling 160 kilometers, fighting rearguard actions the whole way, Bill Slim's Burma Corps must now spend the rest of the week ferrying troops and refugees across the Chindwin River before they can go further as the Nepalese Gurkhas hold off the Japanese vanguard. This they managed to do. Just. And also on the 5th, Joe Stilwell realizes he needs to head his men for India and not China, since the Japanese are further north on the Irrawaddy River than he figured. They have, in fact, even entered China via the Burma Road. So his crew sets out on foot from Indaw the 6th, 114 men strong, with 11 jeeps to carry supplies. His final radio message reads, "Catastrophe quite possible." On the 7th, the jeeps are abandoned, and Stilwell sets a march of 105 beats per minute, 50 minutes per hour, with 10 minutes of rest. There is a new offensive on land this week over in the Soviet Union. The Germans attack on the Kerch Peninsula. The attacks there are actually the first German offensive moves on the Eastern Front this year. This is Operation Trappenjagd, or Bustard Hunt. Now, the Soviets have the 51st and 44th Armies in the north and the south of the region. The Germans plan to break through in the south head-on, then swing north and surround the 51st. They will do this with maximum air support, bringing in Flieger Corps 8 under Wolfram von Richthofen with more than 800 planes. It all begins on the 8th, and the air attacks knock out the 44th's communications. So when German ground forces also attack, the 44th cannot organize a counterattack and has to retreat despite having far larger numbers. On the 9th, German engineers have breached the anti-tank ditches, and German commander Erich von Manstein sends in the 22nd Panzer Division. And as the week ends, it has swung north to try and pin the Soviet 51st Army against the Sea of Azov. And that is the week. With action in the Soviet Union and Madagascar, the end of action in the Philippines, 2 retreats in Burma, and the first ever carrier versus carrier battle. Well, enemy carrier planes versus enemy carriers. That's about the closest you come to actual carrier-on-carrier combat, since they're not designed for offense. And the Japanese win a tactical victory, but the Allies win a strategic one. For the Japanese assault on Port Moresby has been postponed. And strategic victories are not something we have seen anyone really get over the Japanese so far. And the American carrier pilots now have some real combat experience, and they did not perform markedly worse than their enemy counterparts. The general situation still hasn't changed, of course, but with the retreats in Burma and the surrender at Corregidor, this is at least a single note of optimism. And I'll bet a lot of people are thinking right now, scratch one flat top. I wonder if we'll ever hear those words again. If you'd like to get a better idea of aircraft carrier operations and command, you can check out our special episode that focuses on Kido Butai right here. Our Time Ghost Army member of the week is I Wish I Was Brian Blessed. I wonder if this person's parents named them that. Probably so. They probably did. It is because of people like I Wish I Was Brian Blessed and the rest of the Time Ghost Army that we were able to make content like this. So join up yourselves at timeghost.tv and patreon.com and check out all of our collectibles at the Time Ghost Barracks. All sorts of cool stuff is there to show off for your friends. There is a link in the description and something probably popping up here right now. Do not forget to subscribe, and I will see you next time.